Today I'm going to be sharing some acrylic painting tips and showing you how I painted and even came up with the idea for the surreal flamingo, octopus, and moth painting. For anyone interested, at the end of today's video, I'm going to be sharing some updates on my reef. I'm making some adjustments to the paintings on my wall in my office. I'm going to need your opinions on that one, and showing you some of the new corals I bought. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where you've got over 5 hours of footage for this painting, much of it in real time. If you are unfamiliar with Patreon, for as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my slower lessons. I've got over 200 available to you immediately when you sign up, and I have a new one every single week in multiple mediums. If you're not sure if Patreon is going to be a fit for you, head over to my website where you can see my video library, see what's available there. I've also got a free demonstration in colored pencil so that you can see if you think my teaching style might be a fit for what you are looking for. And when I come up with my surreal paintings, it is not as fancy or creative, I think, as it may appear to be when you look at the finished painting. I do it in Photoshop. So I do have a live stream where I designed all of this in Photoshop with you guys live. I'll put a link to that in the video description. But this was the drawing that we came up with. I had taken this photo of a flamingo at the zoo. I loved the photo. Actually, initially when I saw it, I didn't see anything. I didn't love it then. I loved it when I went back and looked at it years later. I just saw it and knew I had an idea for it. So with that, I then just sketched out. I knew I wanted an octopus, and I used my Wacom tablet to sketch this out. You can do it on a regular sketch pad. You don't have to do digital painting, but that's how I came up with the idea, and that is what this is all based off of. So first I painted my canvas just a solid gray color. I then used a white charcoal pencil and got my flamingo and octopus drawn out. And now I'm going to airbrush the background. I just want something very, very soft. I don't want real harsh brush strokes back here, so the airbrush is a good choice for me in this case. And I'm using a lot of greens and turquoises for this. You can see very, very blotchy. I'm using a 0.5 needle on that, or a 0.3. I should have switched to a 0.5. It would have saved me some time because more airbrush paint would have come out faster. In that case, I was just too lazy to do so. I use a Grex airbrush, and that allows me with one airbrush, I can switch needles to between a 2, a 3, a 5. You can also get the kit for a 7. That's too big for anything I would use, so I don't have that. But it allows you a lot of flexibility in making little changes like that. I'm a huge fan of the Grex system. I have a video review of that. I'll put a link to that in the video description. But that is what I'm using here. I used to use Iwata. That's another really good airbrush brand. Now we can go ahead and start with the traditional brushwork. Most of the rest of this is done with regular brushes. I use the airbrush for a few other little areas, not too much though. So when I work with acrylics, I really like Taklon bristled filberts. That is my normal go-to brush. I'll occasionally use rounds and flats, but normally Taklon bristled filbert is like 90% of my brushwork is done with those. So that is what I'm using here. As I do these ripples, the majority of them, I want them to be long horizontal line, short diagonal, long horizontal. That is my general movement. I also need to make sure that they're not leaning from one side to the other. I have marked out little spots on the canvas where I measured to make sure that my line is completely straight all the way across the back. I've made the mistake years ago where I didn't measure twice. I measured the once, thought everything was even, and my water, when I hung it on the wall, realized it was drooping to one side. It was slight, but enough that it was an issue that I had to go back and fix. So do make sure that the water lines, even if it's a stream that's coming down a pathway, so you would think you would tilt it, no, the ripple lines will stay horizontal, so they should be parallel to the top and bottom of your canvas. You wouldn't want to droop them to one side or the other. Got some of that orange or peach reflection in the water there too. And here I'm just very loosely mapping out where my lights and darks go on that flamingo. I don't care about details at all right now. I just want to know approximately where are my lights and my darks and where are my main larger feathers going to be. I'm using a combination of reds, magenta, yellow, and white. Now, as always, I am working on a Frederick's canvas. Just for transparency, I am sponsored by Frederick's. They did provide me with the canvas I'm using here, but they were already the only canvas company that I used. I had some issues with other canvases. I'm not risking my work to that ever again. So that is what I'm using here. Now, the reason I point that out, this is a really smooth canvas. This is the Frederick's Belgian Linen Pro Series. Super, super smooth. And so it's a couple benefits here. One, it's a box canvas. I don't have to frame it. This is a large 30 by 40 inch canvas, or 36 by 40, I think. I don't know. It's big. I don't have to worry about getting a very large, very expensive frame for it. You just paint the edges of the canvas and you hang it as it is, which is a cool look anyway. The other thing is that it's really, really smooth. So these brush strokes that I'm doing here, I can use almost like a dry brush. It doesn't have to be as loaded with paint, and it still looks like I'm blending wet into wet. It gives you a very smooth look in many cases because the canvas is that smooth. Now, that's not to say that a rough canvas is bad. It depends on the techniques you're going for. But with me, with this style and the amount of detail I'm going to end up putting in this, I want a really, really smooth canvas. And that's what I'm using, why I've chosen this specific one. So if you are having trouble getting your acrylics to blend, it might be your canvas. Try a smoother canvas. And even like I've got some of the Frederick's, I love their Convexo canvases, and that's one that we'll talk about that at the end of the video, that I'm considering for above the fish tank. But those canvases, those are the beveled edge, the round ones. I love them, but they have a bit more tooth than I like. They're too rough. So really good if you're painting thick, chunky paint, but for me, where I want things smooth, what I'll do in that case is just put a couple coats of gesso, sand it down, now I've got a nice smooth canvas for the surface that I need. So still just mapping everything out. Now, keep in mind when you're painting like this, this is a layering process. This is not paint by number. You're going to have a lot of very, very unattractive layers before they start looking good. Don't let that discourage you. Also, don't stop and think, well, there's paint on the canvas. He's pink, he's done. No, look how horrible this looks right now. Well, watch what happens as we keep layering. And that is probably one of the biggest tips, the most valuable tips, one of them, that I can give you is layer until it looks good. You're going to have bad layers. A bad layer does not mean that you've ruined anything or that anything's bad or messed up. It just means you're not finished yet. Keep layering until it looks good. The other big tip I have for you, people tend to worry about color. I need the perfect color. Color doesn't play as big of a role in your work as values. If you're having a hard time making your work look realistic, well, one, don't paint an octopus climbing up a flamingo's leg. That's not super realistic. But the bigger thing is that you get proper values. Are your darks dark enough? Your lights light enough? It's not about finding the perfect color. The color is not the thing that is going to make or break your painting or make or break it as far as making it look realistic. The thing that's going to do that are your values. Darks dark enough, lights light enough. And of course, starting with a very accurate drawing in the first place is a big deal. But even that, if your values are good, people will still be drawn to the work. If your work is more muted, your darks aren't super dark, your lights aren't really light, it's just kind of all mid-range, it's boring. I don't care how good of a job you did, how realistic it is, it's boring. If you want to grab the viewer's attention, get that contrast, get those lights light, those darks dark. I can't talk. Words are hard, but that will make a really, really big difference in grabbing a viewer's attention. So as I go through here, look at how I'm starting to build up those really dark shadows on the flamingo and the really light, and he's not even done, but we're starting to get that. So blocking in his foot. And even here is a really good example of color not being important. His leg is violet or purple. That is not what color his leg is in the reference photo at all. Doesn't matter. Did I get the values right? That's what's going to make him look realistic. So again, working on those values. See how I keep making things darker and lighter. Now I'm going to add some detail, the ripples in the water here. I'm just going along with the ripples that are there. I'm not adding new ones. I'm working with what's on the canvas. Now the flamingo's not quite done, but I'm going to go ahead and block out the octopus. And I'm just starting with this medium pink color. He's not really going to stay that color, but it's a good base layer. Now, when it comes to finding reference photos of octopuses, it is very, very hard to find much of anything that isn't food related. Like if you look on Pixabay or Unsplash, I have a really hard time finding good reference photos. So what I'll do is just find a good reference photo. These guys bend in every weird shape. I'm convinced they're actually aliens. They form into any shape you could possibly want them in. So if you don't have a good reference photo, which I'm assuming most of us do not when it comes to these guys, if you have one photo where you can see the texture, just use that and you can shape him almost however you want. So you can get really creative with the way that their legs bend. I like to overdo the kind of spiral or the loops at the end of his legs. And that's just personal preference. I just like the flow that it gives them. So see how I'm just mapping out that there's no real values in here yet. I'm starting to know to get my highlights, but initially look how flat everything was until I start coming through and adjusting highlights and shadows. This is what's going to make it start looking three-dimensional. The amount of lines, the amount of details I do, that's not really going to make him look realistic. It's where are your shadows, where are your highlights? That's what gives you that more three-dimensional look. Now I'll come back through with the shadows and I am just gonna layer until it looks good. This looks terrible right now. That's okay. It doesn't need to look good all the way through. It would actually be weird if your painting looked good start to finish. You've got to get these ugly layers, and these ugly layers build up. Some of these will lightly show through your good layers, and this builds that texture. And when I say texture, I mean more visual texture. If you run your hand across this, it's perfectly smooth. But you get that textured look by having multiple layers, multiple brush strokes showing through. One of the things that I used to do when I first started painting, I was convinced every single thing had to be perfectly blended out. I didn't want any of my brush strokes to show. Oddly enough, that made things look less realistic than if I let my brush stroke show. I like the look now of the brush stroke showing through because it adds to that visual texture. It's almost like unintentional detail. When I was blending everything out super perfect, when I first started painting, everything had almost a plastic feel to it. It was too blended. Using my airbrush here to come back through and do some shadows. You can do this with glazing. The airbrush just gives me a softer feel. So one of the things that I wanted to do on this guy was have him appear softer underwater and more crisp, harsh lines above water to really separate or give you that visual difference between above and underwater. So I went through with the airbrush on a lot of this with the highlights, and it just kind of softened my edges a little bit for the underwater portions. And I don't always do that for things that are underwater. It was just a bit of a challenge because the water that he's in is really shallow. Normally, when I do it on above an underwater scene, the underwater part is a lot deeper. So here, because he's so close to the surface, I felt that I wasn't getting quite the variation between above and underwater that I normally would on a deeper surface. So the way that I solved that problem here was just to go through with that white with the airbrush paint and soften the edges for the underwater. And it really did give me this nice, he feels like when you look at the painting across the room, he does feel like he's underwater in that section just because of the difference in soft versus harsh lines that are above. So now we're gonna go ahead and paint in some coral. I've got some mushrooms here. And I'm starting with everything being pretty muted. I don't want this to be really bright. Initially, when I came up with the idea for this painting, I thought I was gonna go super bold, super bright on the corals. I thought I was gonna add fish. And once I got this in, I just liked the simplicity of the coral and the octopus. Got some zoas and mushroom corals mixed in there. The zoas are the little round guys, just the base layer for them. And look how rough this is. Nothing's really smooth. That's okay at this stage. The other thing to point out, the coral that is words are hard again, the sponges that are farthest in the back, I want the color of those to just kind of fade into the background. I don't want them super harsh. Where here, these little zoas, I want them to be harsh. They're closer to the viewer. And so I'm going to define their edges and their form a lot more. I'm going to let there be higher contrast on those. Whereas the sponges that are in the background, anything as it moves away from the viewer, I'm going to let that fade into the background. So the color needs to be very, very similar to the water with very low contrast. So here adding some greens and yellows into these little zoas. Got a little bit of purple. We've got purple for the mushrooms. Now, coral's fun because you can paint them any color you want. They come, especially zoas, they come in any color you could possibly imagine. So if you're painting something with underwater and you're like, I just need a red coral here, that'll do it. And you can do that with most corals. You can find most corals in just about any color. So now we're going to add in the moths. And originally when I designed this painting, I thought I was going to do the Luna moths, the bright green ones. But when I started designing it in Photoshop, I realized they just didn't work. They drew too much attention. That color was just too bold. So this is one of the reasons that I love doing things in Photoshop before I ever hit the canvas. It lets me figure out if something that seems like an amazing idea in my head is going to be an amazing idea on canvas or not. I can find that out before I waste paint, time, and, well, paint. Or potentially a canvas, depending on how hard it is to fix whatever I thought was going to be a good idea and really wasn't. Here's the same thing. It's just layering. He's going to look pretty terrible at first. You want to build up so that he ends up looking fluffy. And I only recorded the one moth because I pretty much use the same methods on all of them. I went through with a teal color. It looks blue here, but it's really more of a teal color that I used on the flamingo, the octopus, and the moths, and that kind of tied them all together. It really looks blue there. Oh, I guess I did record this moth. I lied. It happens. I'm using a rake brush there to create that fluff. So a rake brush, that I do have a video, I'll have that in the video description, but with a rake brush, that is where the bristles are slightly separated. So with one brush stroke, you get a whole bunch of little brush strokes. Save some time for grass and fur. I still have to go through with a liner and better define some of those, but it does save time for getting that base of the fur. A lot of little details for the texture in there. And again, that is visual texture. There is no texture when you touch the canvas. So while I wanted the Luna moths, these little fluffy guys just worked better. The colors were very similar to everything else in this painting. They just worked a lot better with the overall feel. I mean, you can imagine in looking at this now, bright lime green moths, like that doesn't go with anything else. Now I could have balanced that out by using bright lime green in my corals, but it really wasn't what I was looking for. Once I saw this all together, I liked the softness to this. Being that this painting is for me, it's in my own hallway, you know, what you personally like matters in that case. And that's really how you're going to find your own style in your work. How often are you painting something because you like it? Trust what you like in things. That really does form your style, whether it be the subject matter that you paint, the way that you do your brushstrokes. Trust what you like, because that is how you get your style. That seems to be something that so many artists get hung up on, is I can't figure out what my style is. I like lots of styles or whatever. I just can't figure it out. Paint what you like, whether that be the subject matter, the medium, the way that you do the brush strokes. Paint some stuff for you. A lot of us, especially if you're a commission artist, you do portraits or whatever else, it's very easy to get caught up in, I'm going to paint this because I know it will sell. Well, you want to do that too, obviously, if you're a business. But when it comes to finding your own style, the way that you're going to do that, one is experience, just paint and draw more. But the other is to paint and draw things you like, things that do you want that on your wall? So that is where a lot of my choices come from, is if this is for me, if it's going on my wall, what do I want to see? And that's what's going to form my style. So a little tip for you there if you are struggling to find your own style. So here is my flamingo. I see him when I look out of my office door. He's like the only painting I can see on that wall. I love how he looks. But the wall above my new reef tank, it's bare. I don't know what I want to be there, and this is where I need your opinion. I'm torn between, I guess I can Photoshop it to figure out what would look good, but I'm torn between doing maybe one big painting that is the same width or a similar width and square that goes right over the tank itself, Or what if I did a bunch of the round convexo canvases and just covered it with a bunch of individual round paintings? I know they'll all be marine life. I know in at least one of these there will be a sea turtle, whether it be one big piece or one in one of the littler pieces. But besides that, I just can't decide. Do I want one big square piece? They will be paintings, oils or acrylics, because those in those canvases, once they're varnished, can handle the humidity in this room. The humidity is not that high, but it still would be safer than putting, I don't want to put anything paper right above it just in case water splashes or something like that. But besides that, I don't know, do I want a big square canvas or do I want a bunch of round ones? In my old apartment, I had round, it was all round canvases on this one wall and it looked really cool. So I was kind of thinking that here, or everything on this wall is very square. I mean, the office door there is square. Everything has squares, so maybe I should stick with squares there. I don't know. Give me your opinion on that. And then as far as the updates, so my fish have now been in this tank for almost 2 weeks. They've adjusted well, they're eating well, they're doing really good. I've ordered a Royal Grama and 2 Bangai Cardinals. Those are going to be my next fish in the tank. And then once the tank adjusts, I can order another batch. But you have to let the tank, the bacteria levels in the tank raise to be able to handle the bioload that your fish produces. So you don't want to put all of the fish, like I know which fish I want in here at the end, over the next several months, but you can't put them in all at once because the tank doesn't have enough bacteria to handle that. So you want to slowly add them in. So those are going to be my next fish. I've already ordered them. I'm not sure when they'll be arriving, but it comes from a place that quarantines everything. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's already, they've been medicated and treated for parasites and will be ready to go right into this tank. So that's really exciting. And then I've currently got a bunch of coral. I shared this already, but I've got a bunch of coral in the quarantine tank. So again, still just watching for parasites, which I'm glad I've done because I found some hints of some green bubble algae growing on one of these frags. So it's good to know that before it ends up in the big tank. Not that it's the end of the world if it gets in there. There are things we can do to get rid of it, but we want to catch those parasites before it gets hard to take care of. So these are the corals. Now I am really bad at photographing these. So it's always been hard for me to show you guys what they look like under the proper blue lights. Under the white lights, look how brown everything is. Look how they glow. There's a luminance to them when you put the blue lights, and the blue is how I am typically going to see it. Now, even with these photos, I'm worse at getting video than I am photos, so I'll have to show you some photos of how bright they are. But they are just, they glow. They're stunning under those blues. So I'm still working on how to better photograph and get good videos of those. But those are the zoas. I've gotten a couple of new ones. I can't add anything else to this tank now until this is out of quarantine. So I've got about 5 more weeks to go, and then these can move into the big tank, and then I can get more coral to be quarantined. And the little shrimp in there is also doing really well. I think that's it. Yeah, that is the update on the office. Oh, one other update. I think I'm going to move Glitch. If you're following me over on mewe, which is basically Facebook, if Facebook were still good. mewe is such a good platform. But if you're following me on mewe, you've been seeing Glitch's progress. She's my little frog with a neurological disorder. I think I may move her little vivarium into my office. I don't know if I want to put it on my desk or I can stick it up here on this above my My Little Ponies because I'm an adult. So I think that this would be a nice room for her to move into since she's not really in quarantine anymore. She's just in a small tank because of her neurological disorders. But yeah, that is what is going on here. But again, going back to those paintings above the wall, let me know what you think. Square paintings or round paintings? Because I just cannot decide. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every single week and live streams. Also, make sure to click on the bell notification icon because YouTube doesn't like to notify people anymore when new content goes up. They're terrible. And I've also got an email newsletter. You can sign up for that and be notified when I have new content go up that way. So lots of ways to keep in touch. And of course, follow me over on mewe. That is the main social media platform besides YouTube that I'm using. It's so nice. You won't believe the difference and how much better it is than Facebook. It's good. It's happy there. Anyway, I'll see you guys later.